Hang on, we're drifting away from Mark.
Enslaved Africans built this country, and many were Muslim. And
hang on,
if you look at the founding fathers, God forbid we bring some facts in here.
Time out.
Okay. Well, it's not a yes or no question. Some things aren't yes or no. And by the way, the diversions came from me responding to the misinformation that had been distributed. I didn't randomly go into a historical analysis of Muslims in America. I was responding to the misinformation.
All right.
Okay. Michael Knowles and Marc Lamont Hill join Piers on Piers Morgan Uncensored, among others. Mark's defense of Muslims' right to call to prayer is the key moment we are building toward. However, Piers plays a little back and forth between Matt Walsh and Mehdi Hassan before we get into that portion of the debate. Additionally, this background provides background for the direction of the entire discussion. So before we start the major exchange, let's hear that.
Bothering him about me is that I said in a recent visit to Dearborn,
I think that if you can play church bells, you can pray the call to prayer.
Isn't it okay for Muslim Americans to broadcast a call to prayer? I mean, let me add right now, within reason, of course, and in accordance with all local sound and noise ordinances. But Matt went nuts and said Christianity built this country. Islam did not at all in even the slightest way. That's why we can have our church bells. To which I responded, 1 in 3 of the slaves who built this country were Muslims. They were here long before the Walsh family arrived. You'd know that if you'd studied history, but I know MAGA has an issue with studying. To which Matt responded with a 13-minute video in which he got really mad, but was unable to rebut the 2 central points that I made.
You're as American as anyone else? Really, Mehdi? Really, Mr. Hassan, you're as American as anyone? You're a Muslim who was born in the UK, came to this country less than 10 years ago in your mid-30s to work for Al Jazeera. Okay, is there anyone who seriously thinks that Mehdi Hassan is American at all, much less as American as anyone else?
Mehdi makes a completely valid argument, but Matt Walsh somehow turned it into this strange, almost racist tirade about who qualifies as an American, which is just absurd. As soon as he stopped discussing the underlying problem and began regulating Mehdi Hassan's identity, it was clear that he was merely insecure and bigoted. Mehdi did not, but he remained grounded and Matt spiraled. Now, we can return to the debate where Marc Lamont Hill offers his viewpoint. He begins by pointing out that as a Muslim and someone who has actually studied Islam, he probably has the credentials to weigh in here. Of course, Piers also makes sarcastic remarks, but let's get started.
Can I just jump in as a Muslim and as a professor and as a Muslim and as a scholar of Middle Eastern studies? I think I have something to contribute here.
I think you're ticking a lot of boxes here, Mark, to jump in, yes.
Look, I have to sometimes. So there's a few things here. One, the definition of a religious country is being floated about here in ways that I think are unclear. If we're talking about a religious state, the United States is not a religious state. It's not a Christian nation in that way, right? Is it founded largely on Christian values? Is the culture leaning toward Christianity? Hence why we have federal holidays like Christmas off and Easter off, but we don't necessarily have off for it. Although now we have off for Eid as well, right? But it just depends. But in that way, yes, this is a Christian country, but the principle of this country is that there's religious tolerance and that there's religious plurality. There are about close to 5 million Muslims and many who don't identify for various reasons, and there are about 7 million Jews. When we practice Jewish holidays or observe Jewish holidays, we don't tell people, silence your voice, silence your prayer call, silence this because it's a Christian country, and we shouldn't. We want to honor and respect the beautiful religion of Judaism and the beautiful religion of Islam and the beautiful religion of Christianity.
Here, Mark outlines his qualifications, not to boast, but to demonstrate that he genuinely comprehends the subject in a manner that others just do not. Additionally, he does a fantastic job of dissecting the notion that America is a predominantly Christian country. He clarifies the distinction between a Christian state and a Christian-leaning culture. Additionally, he clarifies that religious diversity is not the main goal. Everyone has equal status, including Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And his observation that Muslims are continuously singled out, but Jewish communities are not told to stop their behaviors, is precisely the hypocrisy that people pretend not to notice. In the following film, however, things change once more when Marc supports Mehdi Hassan's initial claim that a large number of the enslaved Africans who actually constructed America were Muslims. Pierce, on the other hand, truly dislikes what he's hearing, and he interrupts and jumps in, but Marc is unyielding and won't allow the narrative to be changed. Now let's get started.
If you're forced to hide, if you're forced to convert, I'm not using that as, that's not a feather in your cap. The point
But
here
Mark,
is
Mark, we're drifting away. Mark, we're drifting away.
Enslaved Africans, enslaved Africans
we're drifting away from Mark.
enslaved Africans built this country, and many were Muslim, and many even after the era of slavery still held on. They still held on to Islam, and many of them practiced secretly and silently, and even at the beginning of the 20th century with the Moorish Science Temple, with the Ahmadiyya movement. I mean, there are just numerous movements. And if you look at the founding fathers, God forbid we bring some facts in here.
Time out.
You're interrupting the point of
Thank you. Thank you.
In this section of the conversation, Marc Lamont Hill builds directly on Mehdi Hassan's earlier point regarding the enslaved Africans. He calmly reminds the panel that many of the people who actually built America were Muslims. And you can see that his peers immediately cut him off, rather than engaging with the historical reality. It's classic Pierce. As soon as the conversation becomes a little awkward, he abruptly concludes that the conversation is veering off course because the facts contradict the narrative, even though Marc was making a completely legitimate point about the intricacy of early American history, forced conversions, and covert Muslim practices. Nevertheless, Pierce interrupts with a loud "time out," acting as though fixing the record is somehow a distraction. In the following film, Marc ultimately provides the most lucid explanation of the entire argument, outlining why religious freedom is reciprocated and why the Muslim call to prayer is entirely consistent with American ideals.
Thank you. We're moving away from the actual question. It's not about whether Muslims have a right to practice their religion or even a historical lesson about how many may have been slaves that helped found America. That's not the debate we're having. We're having the debate that given there are under 5 million Muslims in the United States, should they be permitted to have a call to prayer of the kind that you would hear all over the Middle East? You're a professor of Middle Eastern studies. You've just declared that. Do you think that would be a sensible move to enable the call to prayer to be heard across America? Yes or no?
Okay. Well, it's not a yes or no question. Some things aren't yes or no. And by the way, the diversions came from me responding to the misinformation that had been distributed. I didn't randomly go into a historical analysis of Muslims in America. I was responding to the misinformation.
All right.
But to your direct question, there should be a call for prayer because we're in a nation that is that has religious tolerance. And the call for prayer is a necessary part of the practice of Islam. It's not just that Muslims want to call to prayer. The adhan is actually part of the process of prayer. But the debate here, or the request here, wasn't for it to be declared loudly across America as you just described it. That was never the debate. No, if there are 4 Muslims in Wichita, I'm just saying hypothetically, no one's saying, well, Wichita has to have the adhan played 5 times a day. That's not the call. If there are Muslim communities and there are masajid, there are mosques there, yes, they should be able to do the call to prayer. It was never supposed to be blasted across the city. It's supposed to be blasted or played within a reasonable earshot. That's all it is. That's not what it's like in Saudi. But to give you a perfect example, as someone who spent the last 15 years or so studying in Israel and in Palestine, I can tell you that when you walk through Jerusalem and you hear the call to prayer, it's within the earshot. It doesn't disrupt the people 5 blocks away or even 2 blocks away. And that's certainly an ecumenical country. And it identifies as a Jewish state, but still Muslims are able to practice their religion and have the adhan played in that context. That's all people are asking for.
What I adore about Marc Lamont Hill is how he ends the discussion in a very straightforward and sensible way, gently and plainly stating that the Muslim call to prayer isn't some noisy public spectacle that is being imposed on entire towns. It is only an essential component of the Islamic prayer routine. The right to do it within a fair earshot of their own mosques is all that Muslim communities are requesting. That's all. Just fundamental religious freedom, no demands for dominance, no mass broadcasting. and it truly puts an end to the fear-mongering and puts everything in perspective when he brings up the example from Jerusalem. As usual, please remember to like, subscribe, and watch the next video if you like this one.